Okay. Do I have audio? Do I have audio on this? We'll see. All right. Do we have audio this time? It's working now? Thumbs up, Jeff? That's the bummer with this. Okay, excellent. So I'll wait a second here and we'll let everybody else back on that we were before. I'm going to have to kick up the speed on. Am I back? Am I back now? I accidentally pushed a button on the back of this thing. All right, good deal. Good deal. Topping off my beverage here. Hey, Jeff. All right, this is the bummer of technology and doing zany things like let's go outside where my phone's just going to die with the battery. You know what? I'm just going to jump right on into it. We'll bring people in along with us. Tonight I am drinking a what's called a hot Russian inside this tumbler that was made by a good friend of mine, Gordon Lecht. He made this together for me. It's got Luther's Rose on the front. So a hot Russian is a white Russian that's topped off with hot coffee, which I figured on an evening like tonight would be, you know, kind of nice where we've got all the snow outside and it's cold and everything. So the question that we posed for tonight's episode is, how are, I got to think this through. It's a thing, then it's a name, then it's a thing, then it's a name. What do leftovers, Dimitri Shostakovich, bacterial infection, and Dwight Schrute. Yeah, Dwight Schrute from The Office. How are those all connected? So I'm going to start with Dimitri Shostakovich. Dimitri Shostakovich was a Russian composer, and he composed what was considered to be not all of his works, but some of his more known pieces are considered nationalistic music. He was a bit of a nationalistic composer for Russia. And every country's got people like this. We've got folks like this as well, too. Well, you may not think about it. Two guys in particular that I'm thinking of that you might not consider nationalistic music, but a guy by the name of Carl King, who you've probably never heard of before unless you're a marching band geek, and a guy that you most definitely have heard of, John Philip Sousa. You know, he was like the 14th or 17th director of the President's Own, which is a Marine Corps only ensemble with the United States Marine Corps. All these different marches and things like that. This is nationalistic music. This is music that gets us excited about who we are as a nation and the things that we've been able to do in the past, and different things of that nature. And Shostakovich, Dimitri Shostakovich, during this Cold War time frame is where he's existing and writing music. He's one of these guys, and the government knows who he is. His music becomes pretty well known. Now, he ends up writing a piece of music that I had the wonderful fortune of playing in college, back when the once great Dickinson State University, under the direction of Dr. Stephen D. Sudduth, I was the one of the trombone players in the band at that point in time. We got to play from his Fifth Symphony, the finale section. So what you need to do when you're done, go listen to this, because it's fantastic. Now, it starts off kind of dark. It's got this motif, which is a musical section which gets passed around between the different sections that comes up again and again and again. It starts off kind of low, kind of growly, kind of sinister. Ba-dun-dun-dun, ba-da-dum-bum-bum, ba-dum-bum-bum, bum-bum-bum-bum-bum-bum-bum-bum. And this gets passed around between the different sections. It comes over again and again. There's a section in there where it almost sounds like you're floating in a boat at nighttime on a river or some slow-moving thing. And then it's got kind of this dark spot where it's kind of like darkness is turning to dawn. And then it starts to kind of go gangbusters, where the entire feel of the piece is very bombastic. It's very, very hopeful. It is very happy sounding. And at the end, where the orchestra is just going nuts and playing their guts out very musically, you get to the tail end, and there's this wonderful finish. You've got this bass drum that hits 10 times, and it gets louder and louder and louder. It's 8 or 10. I'm not remembering. It's one of those two numbers. And you get very excited, and it ends, and you're like, holy cats, what a wonderful piece of music. Well, time goes on, and he dies. One of his proteges, Shostakovich, continues on and continues performing this symphony that he composed. We come to find out later on, they performed this differently during Shostakovich's time of performing this piece, where the bass drum really gets brought out at the end. It crescendos, it gets louder and louder and louder to the very end. During Shostakovich's time, it wasn't. It was a bit more muted. And the reason why is, while this was a nationalistic piece of music, he was kind of rooting in favor of the common man at this point. The tail end of that piece, you've got it. We find out, and he couldn't perform it this way, otherwise musicians and artists would get an all-expense-paid trip to places like Siberia and disappear, type of a thing, in the Russia and the former Soviet bloc states at that time. While everything's happy at the tail end, those 10 bass drum beats are symbolic of the leaders stabbing the common man in the back. You can't share this during the Cold War era. And that comes out later. Some of the musicians end up defecting to the United States, according to legend and lore and things. But regardless of where we go with that, it's a wonderful piece of music, and you should definitely go check it out. It is the finale section of Shostakovich's Fifth Symphony. Go to YouTube and check it out when we're done this evening. Now, like I said, Shostakovich was a nationalistic style composer. Not all of the music that he wrote was nationalistic, but some of his more well-known pieces are very nationalistic, very, very proud of the Russian background that they're part of and things like that, while though at the same time they have to play things a certain way in Russia because bad things can end up happening during this time frame of the Cold War. But he's a nationalistic composer. Now, like Dimitri Shostakovich, our drink tonight, which is called KVAS or KVAS, it's got 5 or 6 other different spellings and pronunciations, is actually was being pushed as a nationalistic beverage in places like Russia and Ukraine and these different former Soviet bloc states. There ends up being different versions of this in a number of different countries, including places like Finland. And believe it or not, China. China's got this beverage as well, too. But in Russia, what ends up happening is it kind of gets pushed as being this national beverage. Post November 9th, 1989, Berlin Wall going down, westernization, so to speak, of Russia, free market economy, all that kind of stuff. When the Berlin Wall falls down and their style and methodology of governing a country changes. So KVAS has been around for an incredibly long time. The first time that we find out about it is mentioned in what is called the Primary Chronicle, or the Russian Chronicle, which is sometimes translated into the Tale of Bygone Time or the Tale of Bygone Years, something like that. And I'm going to put images in the comment section later that shows you some of these things. And in the Chronicle, in the year 996 AD, so this is 4 years before a fellow by the name of Leif goes and actually makes it to America, unlike someone else who does 492 years later. But both of those things happen, and we should we should remember those things, and it's important that we understand those things. That's why I bring those things up. So this is 4 years before Leif Erikson finally makes it to the Americas. It gets mentioned in the Chronicle, year 996, at the baptismal celebration of Vladimir the Great. And along with that, they also mention mead. This ends up being a beverage that gets used by a bunch of Eastern Slavic people, which goes on into the Nordic areas, which is why places like Finland have their own version of it as well. This beverage called kvass or kvass. Now, this is typically a zero alcohol content beverage, although depending on where you're at, it can be up to 1.5%. So to speak. And this was a beverage that was being made quite often, being used an awful lot by the rural folks, the farmers and things, as part of the daily beverage. Like, they're dang near daily going about brewing this beverage. And it's being made out of, well, things that you just kind of have available. When you look at the formation of the United States, after the colonists first get here, they're not spending time putting up maltster floors and things like that. So beer was very much a part of the daily life. They had a variety of different alcohol strength beers that were being consumed at that time. President Jefferson's wife, every 2 weeks, is making 15 gallons of beer. So it's kind of like one of those, except it doesn't have high alcohol content. In the United States, like I was saying, they didn't have a bunch of maltsters doing things for the grinding of grain, for grist mills and stuff, where they could be producing necessarily always beer out of the traditional methodology, like we do today with like two-row barley and stuff. They used a bunch of different stuff. They'd use pumpkins. They'd use a variety of things. It kind of in the same way that the French horn is not from France and the English horn is not from England. They used a plant called the Jerusalem artichoke, which is not from Jerusalem, nor is it an artichoke. It's kind of like they used the root part of a sunflowery type of a thing that they were used for brewing. Places like France, not brewing, getting creative with how you use leftovers. Stale bread, being able to put that to use. The French bread that we have today comes out of that tradition of not necessarily repurposing, but using leftovers in a way that make them palatable later on. You've got this stale, dried out bread. This today, it's kind of a common thing that we enjoy eating, French bread. That was a way of using what you have so that you've got another meal. And kvass was kind of a similar way. Kvass ends up being used or being made a lot of times using stale, leftover rye bread. So think of like the end pieces that never get eaten out of a loaf of bread. If you've got picky kids or anything like that, I usually just say suck it up and eat the sandwich at our house. It's kind of like that. You're using the bread that didn't get used, which has gone stale, and you are using that to brew this kvass. Now, in this kvass, traditionally, and this is being mentioned in the 1830s, we see mentions of this. This is kind of a daily chore routine all over the former Eastern Slavic areas. And like I said, they've even got it in China. So it's spread quite a bit as time goes on. You are using things like you've got your rye bread. You're using molasses. You may or may not be using sugar. Obviously, you're using yeast in there as well, too. Probably more of a bread yeast, or you're getting barm from someplace, or maybe you're using natural yeast, which does come into play. This beverage, kvass, oftentimes has a bit of a sour flavor to it. In fact, the word kvass, depending on which nation it's coming from, one of the common translations is to be made sour is the translation of what kvass is. And there's a reason why that happens. Now, this is where Dwight Schrute comes into play. Dwight Schrute has what? He's got Schrute Farms. Bears, beets, Battlestar Galactica. And in places like Russia, one of the things that grew relatively well was beets. And people would sometimes use these beets in the fermentation process, in the making of this kvass for their daily consumption. Now, what ends up happening is there's this thing called lactobacillus. Now, if my buddy Dale Coleman's on again, he'll understand what I'm saying on this, or my friend Rodney Douglas, or any of my other friends that do home brewing or commercial brewers. Lactobacillus is we will purposely use to infect beer to make what today we call a sour beer. The Germans had a version called Gose, or Gosa, spelled G-O-S-E. That was my introduction to sour beers, believe it or not, was brewing one of those for a local homebrewer contest. Lactobacillus, probably coming from the beets and things like that, where this kvass becomes infected and produces this sour flavor. That's probably where it's coming from an awful lot. Okay, so we got Dwight Schrute, we've got leftovers, we've got Dimitri Shostakovich, and we've got our bacterial infection. We've got all four of those things in play now in this kvass. Now, by the time we get into the 1880s, all right, so 1889, both Montana, North Dakota, and a couple other states become states in the Union here in the United States. So contemporary to this time in places like Russia, though they're not the only ones. Remember, this stems from the former Eastern Slovakian people, and it spread quite a ways. By the time we get into the late 1880s, they are beginning to commercially produce kvass, where it's becoming a little bit more standardized, so to speak, along with the things that we mentioned already, like that stale rye bread, which has probably been baked and toasted and dried out, because you do, just like when we do the things with the grains when we're producing beer, some of those are roasted to produce different flavors and everything. You've got your molasses, you may have sugar, which the yeast needs those sugars to be able to do its thing. Some places are putting berries in it. Out of the Aleutians, for pity's sake, an Alaska area and things like that, there was another one called Coos that I believe was C-U-S-S or something like that. Similar but different. They're putting different berries and things into that, and other nations are as well. But we start to see this being commercially produced, and your common folk, your farmers and all of that, your rural folks are producing less, and what ends up is it's all now, like I said about how Dimitri Shostakovich was a nationalistic class, nationalistic beverage. Fast forward, we go to the end of the tearing down of the Berlin Wall. We've got the end of communism, and we've got westernization starting to happen in places like Russia and all of that. And in comes things like, Coca-Cola. Some folks weren't too happy about that. And some of the leaders in places like Kiev really began to go, hey, let's not forget who we are as a people. We've got this kvass, and really began to push that as this national beverage of the Russian people, former, the Eastern Slovakian people, all of that kind of stuff. And it becomes kind of this national beverage. So much so that after several years' time, it begins to do far better than Coca-Cola and Pepsi, this national beverage. It's who we are as a people. We don't need this stupid stuff from the West. We've got our kvass. So much so, and it began to hit Pepsi and Coca-Cola so badly that they ended up working in conjunction with these different kvass not manufacturers, but brewers, we'll say, although it's kind of brewing, but it's kind of not, to get permission to work with them to be able to produce their own versions of kvass, which is only done in those countries. It's not done in the United States. So you can get it today. It is commercially produced. A bunch of people are still making it today, different battery, so I'm down to 10% battery, so I got to hurry up. You can still get it commercially today. In fact, here's an example. This is what it looks like. It's brown, and it's got a flavor of molasses because of the molasses that's in it, and it's kind of a dark color. Some people liken it to Coca-Cola because, don't forget, this is the nationalistic beverage that ended up supplanting Coca-Cola, because this is the nationalistic beverage, and we don't need that stuff from the West. So I'm going to pour a little bit of it into a glass so that you can see it here in all the snow that we got with 10% battery. I'm going to try to hurry this up. And there we go. If you're brewing this at home, a lot of times it's lighter brown. This is darker brown. Like I said, it's flavor. You get the molasses, but you get some of the other stuff that's in there as well. It's carbonated. It's sweet, and it's kind of got that sour flavor in there as well, too, that they've kind of preserved. So what I'm going to do, guys, is I'm going to put a recipe in there, and those that want to, let's all make some kvass. And in December, we'll do a tasting comparison. We'll see how it is for everybody. That'll give you a chance to do a couple of batches, and we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to take another couple sips of what's probably now my lukewarm Russian, and I'm going to turn us loose here.